even in the memoirs of Chancellor Angela Merkel, for one day tried to object. And then after the first day of the Bucharest summit, Europe folded its hand and it hasn't been independent ever since. Merkel said, okay, we'll go along with this. NATO enlargement was committed. Europe has lost its voice ever since that day. Actually, German chancellors are one more pathetic than the next. Merz is now an open warmonger, completely unpopular, plummeting popularity because the public does not want this. Parties like AfD, which are called extremist right-wing parties, are actually parties that say we don't want World War III. This is all through Europe. The so-called extreme right is not the militarist right. It's the opposite. The mainstream is the militarist faction now because it fell into line with the U.S. neocons and lost its independence. European Union leaders became vassals of the United States after 2008. Who does Ursula von der Leyen work for? Clearly the United States, not for Europe. She just exposed this again in this unbelievably ridiculous so-called trade agreement where Europe gave everything to the United States, even though Europe is a bigger region, 450 million people compared to 335 million in the United States. But Europe said, we hold no cards. We can't negotiate. We fold our hand. We give everything to the United States. And that's von der Leyen. So, all of this is to say, Glenn, that Europe lost its way. It lost its independence. It lost its clarity. And one of the things that happened, just to add, is that Europe became, in its rhetoric, partly guided by the U.S. deep state, insanely Russophobic. Insanely Russophobic to the point that it cannot think straight, honestly, for one moment about how we came to this war in Ukraine, how we could get out of it. If you try to say something honest about it, such as NATO enlargement, such as the West dissing and dumping the Minsk agreements, such as the U.S. refusing to limit its deployment of anti-ballistic missile systems on Russia's borders. If you say anything like that, oh, you're a Putin apologist, because that became the rhetoric of European vassal politics to the U.S. deep state. It's very sad, but Europe lost its independence, and the trade agreement is the most vivid display of that. This is not an agreement between two major powers. This is an agreement between the United States and a vassal region.
You just heard Dr. Jeffrey Sachs, economist, Columbia professor, and one of the few voices willing to speak truth about Western foreign policy, deliver a devastating indictment. Europe folded its hand at the Bucharest summit, and it hasn't been independent ever since. And he didn't stop there. He called out Angela Merkel for giving in to NATO expansion, Olaf Scholz as a warmonger with plummeting popularity, Ursula von der Leyen as a U.S. puppet, and the so-called extreme right not as militarists, but as anti-war realists. Let's unpack what Sachs said, and why this moment reveals the complete collapse of European sovereignty. Sachs points to a single pivotal moment, the 2008 Bucharest NATO summit. That was the day the U.S. pushed to bring Georgia and Ukraine into NATO, despite Russian warnings. And that was the day Angela Merkel briefly objected, only to fold within 24 hours. She said, okay, we'll go along with this. And with that, Europe lost its independence. Because from that moment on, the European Union stopped being a strategic actor. It became a follower, a subordinate, a vassal of U.S. foreign policy, and it hasn't recovered since. Every German chancellor after Merkel has been weaker, more compliant, and more disconnected from public opinion, and none more so than Olaf Scholz, whom Sachs calls an open warmonger. Unpopular? Yes, but not because he's strong, because he's doing Washington's bidding, while pretending it's German policy. One of Sachs' most powerful points? The so-called extreme right in Europe is not the militarist right. It's the opposite. That's a game changer. Because the mainstream media labels parties like Germany's AfD, France's National Rally, or Italy's Brothers of Italy as far-right extremists. But what do they actually say? We don't want war with Russia. We don't want endless sanctions. We don't want NATO expansion to Russia's borders. Are those extremist views? Or are they common sense? Sachs makes it clear. The real extremists are not the ones calling for peace. The real extremists are the mainstream leaders, who blindly follow U.S. neocons into proxy war, economic collapse, and geopolitical suicide. And the public knows it. That's why Scholz's popularity is plummeting. Because Germans don't want war. They want survival, affordable energy, and diplomacy. But their leaders are giving them Washington's agenda, not their own. Sachs delivers one of his harshest lines. Who does Ursula von der Leyen work for? Clearly the United States, not Europe. And he's not exaggerating. Look at the recent so-called EU-US trade agreement. It wasn't a negotiation. It was a surrender. Europe, with 450 million people, gave in to the US, which has 335 million. And what did they get? Nothing. No concessions. No protections. Just a promise to follow US rules on tech, energy, and finance. Sachs calls it what it is. An agreement between the United States and a vassal region. Not equals. Not partners. Not allies. But master and servant. And von der Leyen didn't just accept it. She celebrated it. As if humiliation were victory. Sachs doesn't just blame individuals. He points to a deeper force. The U.S. deep state and its ideological grip on Europe. He says Europe has become insanely Russophobic to the point it cannot think straight. And he's right. Try to mention NATO enlargement as a cause of the Ukraine war, the West's betrayal of the Minsk agreements, U.S. missile systems on Russia's border, and you're not seen as a realist. You're labeled a Putin apologist. That's not debate. That's ideological enforcement. And it's not coming from the European people. It's coming from Brussels, Berlin, and Paris, all under the influence of neoconservative think tanks, U.S. lobbying groups, and intelligence coordination. In short, the U.S. doesn't just influence Europe. It runs it. Sachs ends with a sobering truth. Europe lost its way. It lost its independence. It lost its clarity. And that's not just a problem for Europe. It's a problem for the world. Because a Europe that cannot act independently, cannot mediate peace, cannot negotiate energy deals, cannot resist U.S. pressure, cannot protect its own economy. And worst of all, it fuels the very war it claims to oppose. By sending weapons, by imposing sanctions, by refusing to talk, all while its people suffer from inflation, energy shortages, and declining living standards. And for what? To please Washington? To prove loyalty? To maintain the illusion of relevance? It's not just tragic. It's suicidal. In conclusion, Dr. Jeffrey Sachs gives us a rare and unfiltered look at the real state of Europe today. Not a global power, not a peace broker, not a defender of sovereignty, but a vassal state stripped of independence, voice, and dignity. And the most shocking part? The public sees it. The resistance is growing, but the leaders won't listen. Until they do, Europe will remain a pawn in a game it no longer controls. Stay tuned for more analysis right here on The Informed Perspective. Until next time, stay informed and think critically.
That it is the United States that has walked out of multilateralism. The United States walked out of the Paris Climate Agreement. The United States walked out of the World Health Organization. The United States does not pay its dues to the United Nations. The United States said, we oppose the Sustainable Development Goals. Our English cliche, that's like being opposed to motherhood and apple pie. We're opposed to sustainable development, to ending poverty, to fighting climate change. And when I say opposed, I mean the U.S. government is voting against UN resolutions that call for the Sustainable Development Goals because, as the U.S. spokespeople at the UN say, this is not in America's interest. So when the BRICS come out for the international system, yes, Donald Trump says, oh, that's anti-American, because the United States is absenting itself from the multilateral system.